Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. In the deepest fringes of the galaxy, where the Galactic Coalition's reach was but a distant memory, the massive human supercarrier Dawnbringer floated in the cold vacuum of space. Once the pride of humanity, this colossal warship had disappeared without a trace over a century ago, presumed lost in a forgotten war, its location sealed away in classified archives. To most, the Dawnbringer was a myth, a ghost of a bygone era, a relic swallowed by time and the cruelty of galactic warfare. But myths have a way of resurfacing. It began as a faint ripple across the electromagnetic spectrum, a subtle anomaly in the depths of the nebula expanse, far beyond the controlled borders of Coalition space. Galactic monitors buzzed with the usual background noise, but something lingered, an anomaly that didn't belong. At first, the reports were dismissed as sensor errors. The Coalition, busy with internal politics and the emerging threat of the Zorvian Empire at their doorstep, had no patience for the likes of old ghost ships. But then, the signals grew stronger. The first real alert was simple, almost laughable in its obscurity. A garbled distress signal, but it carried an unmistakable human signature. The Galactic Coalition's high command was slow to act, too absorbed with its own fracturing stability to fully comprehend the significance of this discovery. That was until a high-ranking officer, General Merrick's, a grizzled veteran of countless interspecies wars, reviewed the signal personally. His brow furrowed as he examined the data stream. He knew the history, knew the Dawnbringer, the ship humanity had once sent out as their last line of defense, a harbinger of their might in the galaxy. It wasn't supposed to be here. It wasn't supposed to even exist. After a tense series of meetings, the Galactic Coalition deployed a task force, a diverse group of military experts, strategists, and scientists to investigate. The ship's location was pinpointed just beyond the outer rim, deep in the forgotten territories, far from any known space routes. As the ships prepared for launch, a sense of uncertainty filled the Coalition's ranks. No one knew if the Dawnbringer had truly survived or if it was a trap set by old enemies or, perhaps, something worse. The flagship of the task force, the Galactic Dawn, a vessel that boasted the Coalition's finest weaponry, approached the nebula expanse cautiously. The moment they entered its boundaries, however, the instruments on board fell into disarray, as if something ancient and powerful was blocking their signals. As they neared the center of the disturbance, a sudden surge of energy lit up the void, a burst of electromagnetic radiation that cut through the vast nothingness like a blade. And there, emerging from the darkness, like a titan from the deep, the Dawnbringer slowly materialized on their sensors. The ship was massive, larger than anything the Coalition had ever designed. It had the look of a war machine forged for domination, with hundreds of weapons emplacements and armor plating thick enough to resist the harshest of barrages. Its engines were dark, silent, and ominously inactive, as if it had been waiting for this moment for centuries. The Galactic Dawn received no communication. No greeting, no acknowledgement, just silence. The crew members on board the Galactic Dawn felt a chilling sensation, as if they were standing on the edge of something monumental. A ghost ship or a prize. The ship before them was a relic of an older, more savage age. An age when humanity's might was unmatched, when their colonies spanned the galaxy and their warships were designed not just to fight, but to win at any cost. General Merrick's watched as the officers aboard the Galactic Dawn scrambled to make contact with the Dawnbringer. But every attempt failed. It was as if the ship had been deliberately cut off from the universe, existing in a bubble of time, waiting for the right moment to return. He felt a strange sense of awe mixed with fear. What kind of power had kept this ship dormant for so long? What kind of secrets did it hide? The task force commander, Captain Oren, stood by Merrick's side, her voice calm but laced with urgency. "General, we need to board it. We need to see if it's functional. If we leave it here, someone else might discover it first. Someone far less friendly." Merrick's nodded slowly. "Prepare the boarding teams." The decision was made. A dozen Coalition vessels positioned themselves around the Dawnbringer as shuttlecraft were dispatched to its hull. The crews that would board the ship were a mix of specialists, engineers, historians, tactical officers, trained to face anything from sabotage to ancient alien technologies. Their mission was to uncover the truth behind the ship's silence and its sudden reappearance. Were its systems still intact? Was there a crew, or had it been abandoned? As the shuttles neared the ship, the immense scale of the Dawnbringer became even more apparent. The hull, scarred by years of war, appeared to have withstood the ravages of time and battle. The massive ship's once gleaming surface was now dull, covered in the grime of forgotten eons. Yet, it held an undeniable majesty, a silent monument to humanity's past glory. The shuttle bay doors opened, revealing a vast hangar, eerily quiet. The interior of the ship was like a time capsule, frozen in an age-long past. Dust covered everything, but the signs of battle were still there. Scorch marks on the walls, remnants of weaponry that had clearly seen heavy use, and signs of hastily abandoned stations. But there were no bodies. Nothing but the cold, silent void of the Dawnbringer. The first officer to step into the hangar felt an electric charge in the air, as though something was waiting to awaken. The silence stretched on, heavy and unnerving. Then, as the team began to move deeper into the ship's bowels, a flicker. A single light blinked on, followed by a second, and then more. Slowly, the ship's systems began to stir, as if recognizing its visitors after centuries of dormancy. As the team continued their descent into the labyrinthine corridors of the Dawnbringer, a creeping sense of unease settled over them. The lights flickered, then illuminated fully, casting long shadows across the massive control rooms and military halls. For every step they took deeper into the ship's core, the sense of something ancient watching them grew stronger. It wasn't just the ship itself. It was as if the Dawnbringer had become a living entity, a machine that had learned to remember. General Merrick's and Captain Oren led the group, their military training honed to remain calm in the face of unknown dangers. Yet even they couldn't ignore the eerie silence that enveloped them. Their footsteps echoed unnaturally loud in the corridors, as if they were intruding on something sacred, something that had been left undisturbed for far too long. The first officer, Lieutenant Valen, stood by one of the ship's control panels, studying the ancient tech. "General, this system, it's still running on older human encryption standards. It's crude compared to what we use today, but..." He paused, tapping a few keys, and the console hummed to life, flickering as a series of commands ran across the screen. "It's operational. It's as if this ship has been waiting for someone to reactivate it." Merrick's expression remained unreadable, but his mind raced. Could it be possible? Had the Dawnbringer been designed with a fail-safe, something to prevent its own destruction, or perhaps to protect humanity's most powerful warship from falling into enemy hands? Or worse, had it been left in this state, forgotten by time, so that the galaxy might be reminded of humanity's dominance when the time was right? "What's its status?" Captain Oren asked, her voice cutting through the tension. Valen ran a series of diagnostics, his fingers dancing across the screen. "There are signs of damage, extensive damage, but the core systems are still intact. Weapons, shields, engines, all powered down but functional. It's just waiting." "Waiting for what?" Oren asked, frowning. "A command?" "I don't know, Captain," Valen replied, standing up. "But what I do know is that something activated it. Someone or something must have triggered the reawakening process. This ship wasn't just left here. It was locked down, deliberately hidden. And the longer we stay here, the more I feel like we're just scratching the surface of something far bigger." Merrick's looked over at Oren, then gave a terse nod. "We need to find out what happened to the crew. If they left behind anything that might explain what brought this ship to life, it's in those command centers. Let's move." The team pressed on, deeper into the ship's massive interior. The corridors grew narrower, and the ceilings seemed to stretch higher, as though the ship itself was designed not just for war, but for something more, something purposeful, deliberate. They passed through empty crew quarters, long abandoned. The cold emptiness of the spaces seemed unnatural. How had the crew vanished so completely? Then they reached the central command deck. The massive doors slowly parted as the team stepped into the heart of the Dawnbringer. This room was unlike any they had seen before. It was a monumental structure, rows of consoles and screens arranged in a vast, circular formation, all centered around a raised platform. At the center of the platform stood a singular chair, massive, metallic, and imposing. It was the seat of command where the admiral would sit, the one to give orders that could change the course of the galaxy. It was here that the Dawnbringer had truly been forged as humanity's ultimate weapon. The command deck was pristine, untouched by time, though signs of battle could be seen in the scorch marks on the walls and the twisted metal that lined some of the consoles. But there were no signs of the crew. Valen stepped forward cautiously, approaching one of the active terminals. His fingers hovered over the keys, hesitating. "It's like it's waiting for us," he murmured. Before anyone could speak, the entire room shuddered. A deep, mechanical groan reverberated through the walls, followed by a sudden surge of power. The terminals came to life with blinding light, and a loud, mechanical voice echoed through the ship's chambers. "Primary systems online. Crew status absent. Command acknowledged. Awaiting further instructions." The voice was cold, dispassionate. Yet there was something familiar about it. It wasn't a voice, really, but an automated system built into the Dawnbringer, a failsafe left behind to ensure the ship's readiness for any contingency. Captain Oren's hand instinctively reached for her sidearm, her body tense. "What's happening?" she demanded. "It's responding to us," Valen said, his voice strained. "It thinks we're the crew. The system thinks we're supposed to be in command." Merrick's took a deep breath. This was no ordinary ship, no simple war machine. The Dawnbringer had been built with something more, an intelligence perhaps embedded deep within its code. Could it have been designed with a form of artificial intelligence that had been dormant, waiting for someone to awaken it? If so, what had caused it to remain hidden for so long? "Is there a record of what happened to the crew?" Oren asked, her voice low. Valen's fingers danced across the console, bringing up a series of logs. His eyes widened. "This is strange. There's no direct mention of the crew leaving. Instead, there's a series of entries, reports of an anomaly, a failed mission. The last log entry, it's incomplete. It says something about a final protocol." "Final protocol?" Merrick's asked, stepping closer. "What does that mean?" Valen frowned, trying to decipher the corrupted text. "It's vague. Something about containment. The crew was meant to isolate something dangerous. They locked it down, but it doesn't say what it was." The room grew colder, and a shiver ran down Merrick's spine. This was no ordinary warship. The Dawnbringer had been more than just a weapon. It had been built to house something dangerous, something the crew had locked away before they vanished. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with uncertainty. Then, without warning, the ship's lights dimmed, and the voice spoke again, now with a new, almost ominous tone. "Containment compromised. Initiating secondary protocols." Before anyone could react, the sound of doors sliding shut echoed throughout the ship. The Dawnbringer was coming to life, and it was no longer content to remain dormant. The shock waves of this discovery had only just begun. The ship's atmosphere, once heavy with silence, now hummed with life. The control room was filled with the soft hiss of reactivating systems, and the deep vibrations from the engines began to stir, as if the Dawnbringer itself was beginning to stretch after a long slumber. But that wasn't what had the team on edge. The voice, cold, mechanical, but strangely authoritative, echoed once more, sending a shiver down the spines of everyone present. "Containment compromised. Secondary protocols initiated." The words hung in the air, suffocating the room with a sense of impending doom. Merrick's heart raced, his mind scrambling to piece together the significance of what was happening. Containment compromised? What was the ship holding? And why had it only now begun to awaken after so many years? Captain Oren's sharp eyes darted to the control screens as they flickered to life with new information. She could see the ship schematics laid out in real time. Corridors, hangars, and military installations, all connected by vast data networks. But there were new sections marked on the map, sections deep within the ship, far from the crew quarters or military command rooms. These zones were labeled in bold red letters. Containment Zone Level Alpha. Containment zones? Orin repeated, her voice tense. General, we need to know what's in there. Merrick's looked grim. That's what we're about to find out. Lieutenant, can you access those areas? Valen hesitated. His fingers hovered over the interface, pulling up more of the ship's data. I'm trying, but these areas are sealed. The ship's internal defenses are engaging. We won't be able to breach them without... Before he could finish, a sudden alarm blared throughout the ship. Red lights flashed violently in the control room, and the low hum of the ship's engines intensified. The voice spoke again, its tone even colder, more precise. Warning. Intruder detected. System lockdown in progress. The doors leading into the command center hissed shut, sealing them inside. On the overhead monitors, the previously dormant defense systems activated, revealing vast arrays of automated weaponry, now online and pointing toward every exit and entrance. A secondary warning blared, active threat detected. Deploying countermeasures. Merrick's eyes narrowed. It's not responding to us. It's responding to something else. Something we don't know about, Orin said, her tone sharp. We've triggered something. The ship's locked down. Intentionally, Valen quickly ran another series of diagnostics. I can override the systems, but it's going to take time. The security protocols are ancient. This isn't something we can crack in minutes. Orin turned toward Merrick's. General, what do we do? We're trapped here, and the Dawnbringer is fully activating. If it's anything like its weapons, we're going to be in trouble. Wherever that containment zone is, Merrick said, his voice tight with determination, that's where our answers are. We have no choice but to go deeper into the ship. If we don't, we risk the Dawnbringer locking down completely. We'll be prisoners of a warship we don't understand. Understood, Orin replied, her eyes scanning the crew. You heard him. Move out and be prepared for anything. As the team gathered their gear and prepared to move out, the ship's rumbling grew more intense. The corridors seemed to stretch and twist unnervingly, as if the ship was alive and aware of their every move. The air smelled faintly of oil, metal, and something else. A sharp, acrid scent that stung their nostrils, the residue of old weapons systems, dormant for far too long. The deeper they went into the ship, the more oppressive the silence became. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows lengthening unnaturally as they moved through corridors that appeared abandoned, yet filled with the eerie feeling of being watched. The Dawnbringer was a giant, but now it felt more like a prison, its interior growing colder and more hostile with every step they took. Finally, after what seemed like hours, they arrived at the entrance to the containment zone. Massive reinforced doors stood before them, sealed with a thick, bioengineered alloy that would take an army to breach. Valen quickly accessed the terminal beside the door, his fingers flying across the console as he tried to override the lock. Come on, he muttered under his breath. Sweat dripped from his brow as he worked. This system is a nightmare. It's not just a physical barrier, this is biological. It's like the ship itself is alive, protecting whatever's inside. A low, mechanical hum filled the air as the door creaked open, revealing an ominous darkness beyond. The air was thick, the temperature inside several degrees colder than the rest of the ship. The lights flickered erratically as they stepped inside, revealing a vast chamber, its walls lined with strange, organic-looking technology that pulsed faintly with an unnatural glow. In the center of the room, there was a containment unit, a massive, transparent structure filled with a liquid that glowed faintly green. Within it, suspended in the fluid, was something that made even Merrick's experienced mind pause. A creature. It wasn't humanoid. It wasn't anything they had seen before. The being's form was a mass of shifting, ethereal shadows, part energy, part something far more ancient. Its features were indistinct, constantly shifting as though its very essence defied physical laws. Yet the power it radiated was palpable, an energy that seemed to tear at the fabric of space itself. What in the hell is that? Orin whispered. Valen stepped forward, a sense of dread filling him. It's not human. It's not even of this galaxy. Marix's gut twisted with an instinct he couldn't shake. Whatever that thing is, it's why the Dawnbringer was abandoned. It's why the crew is gone. The containment unit seemed to pulse, as if responding to their presence. And with it, the ship seemed to shift again, the deep vibrations intensifying. Containment breach imminent. Initiating protocol. The voice's warning was almost a whisper compared to the deafening roar of alarms that erupted throughout the ship. The creature's form began to stir. It was waking up. The containment unit shuddered, the strange creature inside it pulsating with an eerie, unnatural energy. The liquid surrounding it began to churn, glowing brighter as the room's air grew heavier, thick with tension. A wave of static electricity crackled through the room, making every hair on the team's neck stand on end. It wasn't just the ship that was waking up, it was whatever was trapped inside. "Get back!" Marix shouted, instinctively pushing Orin away from the containment chamber. His voice cracked through the chaos, but it did little to dispel the feeling of dread that had settled over the group. The air was thick with foreboding, and the ship groaned as if responding to the awakening of the creature. "General!" Valen shouted from the control terminal. "It's getting worse. Whatever that thing is, it's manipulating the ship's systems. I can't stop it." The ship's alarm screamed in full force now, and the lights flickered as if under assault. As the creature's form twisted in the tank, its alien presence began to distort the very fabric of the Dawnbringer. Then, with a sudden, horrific crack, the containment unit's glass walls shattered, sending a shockwave through the chamber. The liquid splashed everywhere, and the creature, half-formed, its mass a writhing amalgamation of shadow and light, rose from the remnants of the tank, expanding with impossible speed. It was an abomination of form, its edges flickering and shifting, as if it were composed of raw energy itself. The team took a collective step back, weapons raised instinctively. But no gun or blade would make a difference against this thing. It wasn't flesh. It wasn't even truly physical. Before anyone could react, the creature unleashed a scream, an unearthly sound that wasn't audible in the traditional sense. It reverberated directly into their minds, a sound that bypassed the physical world and struck at the core of their being. The sound was pain. The sound was fear. It shattered every ounce of their composure. General Marix staggered, feeling his thoughts unravel as the scream reverberated in his skull. "It's controlling us," he muttered, fighting to keep his senses intact. But it was too late. His vision blurred. His arms trembled as his body began to betray him. Orin's voice was the only anchor in the madness. "Marix, snap out of it." She fired her sidearm, but the shots seemed to pass through the creature as if it weren't even there, their projectiles disintegrating into nothingness. Valen, his hands trembling, tried to re-establish the terminal's link to the ship's core systems, but the screens were glitching wildly. The ship's defenses, its AI, it's integrating with the creature. The Dawnbringer is no longer just a vessel. It's becoming part of it. The creature's form shimmered, and for a moment, Marix saw its face. If it could be called a face. It was a mass of shifting, tendril-like structures, its eyes glowing with an intelligence that was far beyond human comprehension. And in those eyes, Marix saw an unsettling truth. This creature had been here long before humanity, long before any known species in the galaxy. It had waited in the depths of space, dormant, until the Dawnbringer had come to claim it. The creature had been a weapon all along. It was then that the full scope of the ship's transformation became apparent. The Dawnbringer's once dormant weapon systems powered up in an instant, each of them now locked onto their positions, directly targeting the outer hull of the ship. The walls themselves began to ripple as though the ship's very material had become organic, alive, and attuned to the will of the creature. Orin cursed under her breath. "We need to get out of here. Now, it's too dangerous." But as they turned to leave, the doors slammed shut with an enormous clang, locking them inside the containment chamber. The creature loomed before them, shifting its form, its mass expanding and contracting like a sentient storm. It didn't just move. It undulated, its tendrils reaching out as if trying to grasp the very essence of space itself. It was everywhere and nowhere at once, an entity too vast and incomprehensible to grasp in human terms. Valen began to frantically type into the terminal. The ship, it's locking us in. It's initiating a final lockdown. The Dawnbringer is now a weapon, and we are its targets. Merrick's mind cleared enough for him to focus. Can you override it? He asked, his voice strained. I don't know. It's not responding to me. It's like the ship is merging with it, becoming one. Valen's eyes widened with realization. The creature is controlling the ship. We can't just destroy it. It is the ship now. If we don't stop it, it'll turn the Dawnbringer into a superweapon and launch an assault on the galaxy. Orin raised her weapon again, despite knowing it would do nothing. We've got to find a way to stop it, before it kills us all. Just as panic began to settle in, the ship's voice returned. Final protocol engaged. Preparing for launch. The words rang out through the chamber like a death knell. The creature, this thing, wasn't merely awakening. It was preparing the Dawnbringer for something far worse. It wasn't just a galactic weapon. It was something that could bring an end to civilizations. Merrick's heart pounded as he scanned the room, his thoughts racing. If they couldn't stop the creature's control over the ship, it would be too late. We need to cut off its control. We need to isolate it from the ship's core. We can't, Valen said, nearly hysterical. The core is being integrated into it. If we try to cut the connection now, the ship will destabilize and will be killed in the process. Then we die trying, Merrick said, his voice hardening. The galaxy can't afford to let this thing reach Coalition space. We need to do whatever it takes. Orin nodded in grim agreement. I'll help you, General. As the ship's systems whirred and powered up, the hum of energy surrounding them grew louder and louder. The creature's form rippled, its eyes glowing brighter with each passing moment. Every fiber of the Dawnbringer seemed to be vibrating with its energy. We need a plan now, Merrick snapped. Valen's fingers flew over the terminal again. There's one way, but it's risky. We can initiate a manual shutdown of the core, but it will send a surge of energy throughout the entire ship. If we do it, we'll overload the core, destroying both the creature and the Dawnbringer. The atmosphere in the containment chamber was thick with tension. The hum of the ship's systems, once silent and dormant, was now deafening. A pulse that seemed to vibrate through the very air they breathed. The creature loomed in front of them, its shifting, ethereal form growing ever larger. Its eyes gleaming with an intelligence that spoke of eons of waiting. Its very presence seemed to warp reality, distorting the space around it. General Merrick stood at the center, his mind racing. He knew the stakes, knew that the Dawnbringer was no longer just a warship. It had become something else entirely, something far more dangerous. The creature, now fully awakened, was connected to the ship's core systems, controlling them with a mind-bending grip that stretched across every inch of the vessel. And if they couldn't sever its control now, the Dawnbringer would become an unstoppable force, a weapon capable of wiping out entire star systems. Valen's face was ashen, his hands trembling as he continued to work at the terminal. The urgency of the moment was overwhelming, and the terror of failure gnawed at his insides. General, I've accessed the core shutdown procedure, Valen said, his voice strained. But I need to activate a series of manual overrides to channel the power surge to a containment array that can absorb the blast. If we don't get this right, the ship's entire energy system will short-circuit, and will be caught in the blast radius. Merrick's mind raced. There was no room for error, no second chances. He turned to his team, locking eyes with each one of them. We don't have much time. The creature's control over this ship is tightening. We need to move now. Orin stepped forward, her face set in a determined scowl. Let's get it done, then. As Valen continued his work at the terminal, Merrick's moved quickly, scanning the room. The creature pulsed, its mass of shifting shadows writhing in the air, tendrils flickering like dark fire. It seemed to sense their intentions, for its eyes narrowed and its form seemed to ripple with growing anger. Without warning, the ship's voice boomed once more, its cold, mechanical tone reverberating in their minds. Final protocol. 60 seconds to launch. All intruders will be eliminated. The countdown had begun. Merrick's grip tightened around his weapon, though he knew it was useless against the creature. They needed to destroy the ship's core to sever its connection to the Dawnbringer, and the creature with it. Valen was the only one who could initiate the core shutdown, but even that wasn't guaranteed to work. The ship's systems were merging with the creature, adapting and fighting back. Every moment they spent here was another step closer to being trapped in a death trap of their own making. Valen, how long? Merrick's called, his voice tight with urgency. I'm almost there, Valen shouted back, his fingers flying over the keys, the screens flickering as the ship fought him every step of the way. The ship's countermeasures are almost online. I need you to cover me. Orin nodded sharply. Everyone, weapons hot. We're not letting this thing stop us. With a battle cry, she led the team into position, their weapons aimed at the creature, though the reality was that none of them expected to defeat it through brute force. The creature's form continued to shift, expanding and contracting as if the ship itself were breathing in rhythm with its movements. Its eyes locked onto them, a cold, malevolent intelligence that knew exactly what they were trying to do. The creature seemed to grow larger with every passing second, its tendrils reaching out, seeking to ensnare. Its voice, an eldritch sound that felt like it came from every direction, rippled through their minds once more. You cannot stop what has already begun. This ship is mine. All of you are mine. The words struck like a physical blow, and Merrick's felt his knees weaken. The mental strain of resisting the creature's influence was overwhelming. But he pushed through it, grinding his teeth as he focused on the task at hand. Valen! Orin shouted, her eyes narrowing as the creature's tendrils began to swirl around them, blocking their path. Hurry up! I'm trying! Valen yelled back, sweat beading on his forehead. I just need a few more seconds. I need to reroute the power. Just a few more seconds. Merrick's pulse quickened as the countdown continued in the back of his mind. The creature's form was now fully materialized, a swirling mass of dark, ever-changing energy that seemed to breathe, alive and hungry. It towered above them, its tendrils crashing down with horrifying speed, each strike sending shockwaves through the room. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the walls seemed to warp and shift as though the Dawnbringer itself was being twisted by the creature's will. Merrick's fired a burst of energy at one of the tendrils, but it passed harmlessly through the creature's form, dissipating into nothing. The creature responded with a low, reverberating hum, and then it spoke again, this time, in a voice that was almost soothing, as if mocking their attempts. I am the end of your kind. Your weapons are useless. I have seen empires rise and fall. Your efforts will only hasten your extinction. Orin fired again, but her shots were just as ineffective. It's not even physical anymore, she muttered in frustration. Then Valen shouted from the terminal. I've got it. The power reroutes are in place. I can activate the overload. But before he could finish, the creature's tendrils lashed out with terrifying speed. One of them wrapped around Valen's waist, lifting him off the ground and slamming him into the wall with bone-crushing force. The terminal sparked and went dark, and for a moment, it seemed like all hope was lost. No! Merrick's roared, charging forward. His mind screamed at him to act, to save Valen, but there was no time. The countdown was nearing its final moments. Orin fired rapidly at the tendril holding Valen, each shot tearing through the shadowy mass but doing little to slow it down. The creature seemed to feed off the disruption, its form writhing even more violently in response. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, Valen's hand shot out from the tendril's grip. He had somehow managed to activate the shutdown procedure manually, his final act of defiance against the creature. Done, he gasped, collapsing to the floor. The ship's voice boomed one final time. Protocol complete. Overload in progress. The lights flickered, and the hum of the ship's systems reached a deafening crescendo. The Dawnbringer's entire power grid began to pulse, surging with energy. The creature let out a horrifying scream, one that reverberated through the ship, as if it were fighting to maintain its hold. And then the ship began to implode. Everyone, out! Now! Merrick's ordered, grabbing Valen and pulling him to his feet. The walls buckled and groaned under the strain of the overload. The countdown had reached its final moments. The Dawnbringer was no longer a ship, it was a bomb, and the fuse had been lit. As the team sprinted through the hallways, the entire structure around them shook violently, the power of the ship's self-destructive overload reverberating in the air. Behind them, the creature let out one final, ear-splitting roar, and the Dawnbringer began to collapse in on itself. The corridors of the Dawnbringer shook violently. Every step Merrick's and his team took felt like running through a war zone. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning circuits, and the ship's alarms blared continuously, heightening the sense of impending disaster. Each of them could feel the tremors beneath their boots, the structure of the ship bending under the weight of the catastrophic power overload that had been set in motion. But there was no turning back. The clock was ticking. "Keep moving!" Merrick's barked as he yanked Valen along, his arms still trembling from the aftereffects of the creature's mental assault. Valen was barely conscious, his face pale and streaked with blood from where the tendril had slammed him into the wall. But his hands still gripped the rifle tightly, and his eyes were sharp with focus. The sound of the Dawnbringer's systems unraveling grew louder with each passing second. The hum of energy that had once been a stable force now felt like the groan of a dying animal, and the walls around them twisted in unnatural ways as the ship's AI and the creature fought to hold onto control. It was clear the creature wasn't giving up easily. Orin, ahead of them, turned around, her face grim. "We're not going to make it if we don't pick up the pace." She was right. The corridor ahead had begun to buckle as the ship's structural integrity began to fail. The lights flickered in an erratic pattern, casting shadows on the walls that seemed to move on their own. The ship was falling apart. The Dawnbringer, once a titan of war, an impenetrable fortress, was now little more than a crumbling ruin. "We'll make it," Merrick said with determination. "We have to." With one last burst of energy, they sprinted down the corridor toward the nearest escape pods. Each step was a struggle, with the constant rumble of the ship's systems collapsing beneath their feet. The creature was still in the ship, somewhere, its influence spreading through the walls and floors. It had already merged with the core. There was no saving the Dawnbringer. There was only one chance to survive. The escape pod bay was just ahead, but as they approached, a massive explosion rocked the entire corridor, sending them sprawling to the ground. The shockwave slammed into their bodies with the force of 1,000 tons of metal, and for a moment, everything went black. When Merrick's came to, he was lying on his back, staring up at the flickering ceiling. His head was spinning, and his ears rang with a high-pitched whine. The ground beneath him continued to tremble, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't just the ship's dying convulsions. It was the tremors of something else, something powerful, something that had broken free. He sat up quickly, his heart pounding in his chest as the realization hit him. The creature, before he could finish his thought, a chilling, guttural voice filled his mind. "You think you can escape?" It was everywhere. It was in his mind, inside his very thoughts. The voice wasn't just speaking, it was assaulting him. The creature had found them. Merrick staggered to his feet, his vision swimming as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. "Get up!" he shouted to his team, his voice strained. "The escape pods! Now!" Orin was already up, though she appeared just as disoriented. Her eyes flickered around, searching for the source of the sound. Where is it? Where the hell is it? They had reached the escape pod bay, but the doors were sealed. A large, flickering terminal next to the bay entrance indicated a security lockdown, likely a last-ditch defense mechanism set by the ship. The creature had anticipated this. They had no time to waste. Valen staggered to the terminal, his hands shaking as he worked to hack into the system. "I can override the lock, but I need a few more minutes. The creature's influence is messing with the system." The voice of the creature echoed in their minds again, a low, menacing laugh reverberating through the walls. "You cannot escape. This ship will be your tomb. I am not just your enemy. I am the ship. You cannot flee from what you've awakened." Merrick's clenched his fists, feeling the pressure build in his skull as the creature's presence suffocated him. "Valen, hurry!" he shouted, but the words came out strained, distorted, as though the creature was trying to warp their reality. Oren's gunshot echoed through the bay as she fired at one of the walls, but it was pointless. The shots disappeared into the air, scattering like fragments of nothingness. The creature was too powerful now. It had taken over the ship, twisted its very existence to its will. "We need those pods, Valen," Merrick's shouted again, his voice breaking through the mental fog the creature had cast over them. With a final, desperate cry, Valen slammed his hand down onto the terminal. "Got it. The locks are open." The massive bay doors to the escape pods slid open with a resounding hiss, and a rush of cool air flooded the room. The pods were ready, their sleek hulls glistening under the flickering lights. Merrick's grabbed Valen's arm and pulled him toward the nearest pod. "Get in." Oren was already in the second pod, her face pale but resolute. "Move it, Merrick's. We don't have much time." Merrick's pushed Valen into the pod and quickly followed, sealing the hatch with a swift motion. The final moment of escape was within reach, but as the pod doors closed, the ship's voice boomed one last time, a chilling command that left no doubt in their minds. The creature was not going to let them leave without a fight. "The end is inevitable. You cannot outrun your fate." Merrick's fingers hovered over the launch button, his heart pounding in his chest. He was unsure if he could still hear the creature's voice or if it was simply in his head, but the air inside the pod seemed to tighten, and the ship's rumbling intensified. The Dawnbringer was dying, but it wasn't just the ship that was on the brink of collapse. The creature was too, and it would drag everything down with it if they didn't act quickly. The countdown began. The pod's engines hummed to life, and with one final glance back at the Dawnbringer, Merrick's pressed the launch button. The pod shot away from the dying ship, tearing through the atmosphere of the crippled warship as the final explosion rocked the vessel behind them. The Dawnbringer shattered into 1,000 pieces, sending waves of destruction rippling across space. Merrick's heart sank as the pod sped away, and for a moment, he thought they had made it. But deep in his gut, he knew this wasn't over. The creature, the entity that had been freed, had tasted freedom. And if the Dawnbringer had been its prison, then humanity had no idea what horrors it would unleash next. The escape pod trembled violently as it rocketed away from the wreckage of the Dawnbringer, the shockwave from the ship's explosive destruction sending ripples through space. The external viewports were a blur of burning debris and shattered metal, the remains of the warship spiraling into a chaotic dance of destruction. Merrick sat back against the padded seat, his mind reeling. The creature, the entity that had taken control of the Dawnbringer, was now free, and no matter how fast they fled, there was no escaping the knowledge that they had merely delayed the inevitable. He glanced around at his team. Oren's eyes were fixed on the viewport, her expression unreadable, but her knuckles were white as she gripped the edges of her seat. Valen, though still pale and bleeding from the earlier impact, was staring down at the pod's control panel, tapping into the communication system in a desperate attempt to establish a connection with the Coalition fleet. Merrick's could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on them. The terror of the creature's influence still lingered in his mind, a gnawing presence at the back of his thoughts. Even now, the faint whispers of its voice echoed in the recesses of his mind. "You think you've won, but this is just the beginning." It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. Finally, Valen turned toward Merrick's, his eyes wide with panic. "I can't reach the fleet," he said, his voice tight with fear. The ship's communication systems were compromised. The creature, it's too powerful, is blocking any signal from the pod. Merrick's jaw tightened. He knew the creature was far more than just a physical entity. It had merged with the Dawnbringer, become a part of its very being. If it had that kind of control over a ship as massive as the Dawnbringer, how much more could it influence now that it was free? "We need to warn the Coalition," Oren said, her voice hard with resolve. "If we don't get word out now, we're not just dead, we're bringing the entire galaxy down with us." Merrick's nodded in agreement. "We need to find a way to re-establish communication. If we can get to a Coalition outpost, we might be able to warn them in time." The pod jolted as it veered off course, a brief alarm flashing on the control panel. Valen scrambled to regain control, his fingers dancing over the console. "Something's wrong," he muttered, his brow furrowing in concentration. "I can't stabilize the trajectory. The pod's being pulled off course." Oren's eyes snapped toward the panel, her pulse quickening. "Is it the creature?" "I don't know," Valen admitted, his voice strained. "But whatever it is, it's pulling us in toward something." Marex's heart skipped a beat. "It's coming for us." The realization hit him with a terrifying clarity. The creature had been able to manipulate the Dawnbringer, a vessel built to be impenetrable. Now that it was free, there was nothing to stop it from finding them. "Brace yourselves," Marex ordered, his voice cutting through the tension like a whip. The pod lurched again, and then it was as if the very fabric of space itself had begun to unravel around them. Time seemed to distort as the pod was pulled through a violent gravitational field. The view outside became a swirl of colors, distant stars stretching into incomprehensible streaks of light. The ship's hull groaned and shuddered under the strain, and the systems inside the pod flickered, struggling to stay online. "What's happening?" Valen shouted, desperately trying to override the pod's automatic systems. Oren gritted her teeth. "It's pulling us into a black hole. We're in a gravity well." Marex's stomach dropped. A black hole. An event horizon where nothing, not even light, could escape. The creature wasn't just chasing them. It was controlling the very space around them. "No," Marex muttered, realization dawning on him. The creature wasn't just free. It was shaping space itself, warping the fabric of reality. It had become a force, something beyond comprehension. A godlike entity whose reach extended beyond any weapon or technology humanity had ever faced. "Hold on," Marex barked, gripping the edges of his seat. "We're not going down without a fight." But there was no way out of this. The pod was already within the grasp of the black hole's pull. It was as if the universe itself had become an extension of the creature's will. Every instinct told Marex that this was the end, but he wouldn't accept it. Oren was at the controls, trying to steer the pod away, but the ship systems were failing. "We can't fight it. It's not just the ship. It's everywhere." Valen's eyes darted over the panel, his hands trembling. "There's one thing we can try, a quantum bypass. It's risky, but it might give us a chance to escape the event horizon." Marex met Valen's gaze, his heart pounding. "Do it." Without hesitation, Valen slammed his hand onto a sequence of buttons, and the pod's engines hummed louder, whirring to life in a desperate, last-ditch attempt to escape the gravitational pull. The ship shuddered violently, the black hole's immense gravity trying to tear it apart as the systems engaged the quantum bypass. For a moment, nothing happened. The pull of the black hole grew stronger, and Marex could feel the edges of his vision darkening, as if the very space around him was being torn apart. Then, with a blinding flash of light, the pod was ripped from its course. The violent forces of the black hole's gravity faded, replaced by a jarring sense of weightlessness. Marex blinked, disoriented. The pod was no longer tumbling toward the event horizon. Instead, they were somewhere else. The stars outside were a brilliant, calm expanse. But there was no escaping the truth. They had narrowly escaped the grasp of the creature, but now they were alone. Adrift in space with no means of contacting the coalition, no way to warn them about the horror that was about to consume everything. Valen exhaled a shaky breath. "We're alive. We're out. But for how long?" Marex stared out into the vast, silent void of space. His mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, relief at their survival, but also the crushing weight of failure. The creature had been awakened, and its influence was growing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "We may have escaped the Dawnbringer, but the war has just begun," Marex said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. "We can't stop it alone. The galaxy needs to know what happened. We need to find a way to get to the coalition, and we need to warn them before it's too late." Oren nodded, her resolve hardening once again. "We'll find a way." We have no other choice. Merrick's glanced at Valen and Orin, the two surviving members of the crew who had fought alongside him. The battle was far from over. The creature, whatever it truly was just getting started. But now it was a fight for survival. And he would be damned if he let the galaxy fall without a fight. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stellar HFY content. Ring that bell to stay updated, and we'll see you next time.